I'm Bob from Bob's Workshop. If you were like me and you grew up in the 1970s and you first discovered toy trains at that same time, and you wanted a diesel locomotive, chances are that you may have had a Lionel Alco Diesel. These were pretty affordable back then, and they still are. They're pretty common, and I've been able to find quite a few over the years at train shows and swap meets. In this video, I take some of those finds and I repainted them. And I either restored them to what they looked like or closer to what they looked like when they were new, or I repainted them altogether. So in this episode, I'm going to show you 4 or 5 older projects, but they all share a common theme of the Lionel Alco Diesel. And I think these all turned out better than when I first found them. So here is a collection of my Lionel Alco Diesel projects over the last few years. I hope you like it. This Lionel Alco body was marked for $3, but the seller told me to make an offer. So I said, how about $2? A deal was made, and now I own this shell that's missing its front apron and also has a break in the rear where the mounting screw should be. I wish that I had gotten one of these rotary tools years ago. It was a Christmas gift from my daughter, and it makes trimming this jagged edge so much easier. A little bit of sanding will make the lower edge even, smooth, and ready for a new repair part that I'll make in the kitchen, of all places. But before I do that, I want to clean and wet sand the rest of the shell. This removes the lettering and helps to blend away any nicks or other imperfections. The result will be a nice, smooth, clean surface ready for new paint. I'll trim a sheet of styrene plastic to a width of about 3/4 of an inch. This is about what's needed for the new apron, but it's also a width that fits against the nose beneath the marker boards. Because you see, I'm going to use that space to create the curves after heating the plastic in our air fryer. After about a minute at 300 degrees, the strip begins to soften. While it's warm, I'll press it against the nose in order to match the shape. You have to work pretty quickly, and I can't get it all at once, but after a few trips through the air fryer, I have a pretty close match. The top of the new apron is sanded against a flat block of wood so that it will match the bottom of the shell. Plastruct plastic weld cement forms a very strong bond very quickly. It also flows well between the two pieces. This clamp isn't very tight. It's just to keep the trailing edges of the new apron from bowing outwards until the cement can set. I'm a little surprised because I think this is actually going to work. I first thought of using the air fryer when I was building the Disney castle, but it did a pretty good job here too. Yep, I can totally live with this. The basic shape is pretty good, and it's very well attached to the old shell. Now I just need to shape the apron's edges and maybe add some detail with thinner sheet plastic. I'm not trying to recreate the original apron. I'm just adding a few pieces to break up that big blank area. The rotary tool and a narrow nail sanding board made it possible to patch the broken area with more sheet plastic. Now that the opening is square, a patch piece is easy to cut. A little bit of modeling putty, some time for it to dry, and then a final sanding before priming the exposed or unpainted plastic. I have a complete running Alco that I can't bring myself to repaint, even though it's yellow and only costs $20. So I'll just leave the Union Pacific body alone for now and use the motorized base with the repaired shell. I can always swap the shells back later at some point down the road, and I already have plenty of repainted shells that share frames, so this is really no big deal. When this red and white Texas Special was new, it probably had a single motor and frame just like this one. Or who knows, maybe it was a dummy unit. Either way, this motorized base is a nice fit. And next comes the hard part, thinking how to paint and decorate this Alco. Just turning it back into the Texas Special would be easiest. And the white stripe at the bottom means I could save money by printing my own inkjet decals. But most of my trains are either Amtrak, Amroad, or Baltimore and Ohio, so Texas doesn't really fit geographically. I'm going to let the primer sit overnight, maybe even 2 days, and then very lightly wet sand with 600 grit sandpaper. I want the final coats to be as smooth as possible, and wet sanding between coats helps. Even with multiple thin coats, Rust-Oleum spray can end up being pretty thick, and I'd like to keep as much detail as possible. The blue sides have turned out pretty well, and I'll let this sit for a few days before painting the roof red and the new apron black. Not to jinx anything, but this project is going very well so far. The other 2 engines that I repainted also went smoothly, so maybe I should just stay with Metro locomotives. They do have a newer paint scheme with orange and red stripes, and those decals are available on eBay. I wonder. Finally, it's time for decals, and these are factory made and purchased from eBay. This set is made for an HO scale diesel, but this Alco is nowhere near a true O scale proportion, so the smaller decals should work well. A decal setting solution is not strictly necessary since these surfaces are so flat, but it would soften the decals and help them conform had they been installed over rivets or other raised details.
The stripes that came with the HO scale set would not really work on the nose of this Alco. Luckily though, I have some leftover stripes from an earlier Silver Streak train. I actually have a pretty large and growing collection of leftover decals, and I'm going to use up a few to finish this little Lionel model. Metra locomotives have a white stripe at the base of the shell, so that was masked and sprayed. And while I was at it, I also sprayed the rear of the body a nice glossy white. I just thought it looked nice. So my lucky Metra streak continues with this Alco. And next, I think I might try to make a caboose for Metra. It doesn't make sense, I know. It's a passenger line. Why would they need a caboose? But I think I'll give it a shot. This is another Lionel Alco decorated for Santa Fe. This is only the shell this time. It's very similar to a dummy unit that I worked on a few weeks ago, but the red on the nose of this model is a little worse than my previous one, and the silver paint on the back is in even worse condition than the nose. I don't think I'll be able to return this to the way it looked originally, so I'm going to do something a little bit different with this one. This locomotive is way past the point where I could make it look better with some touch-up paint and a brush. The lettering on the side, and the numbers too, are applied with Lionel's heat stamping process. The lettering is actually stamped a little bit into the plastic, and it's very hard to get rid of with sanding alone. I'm going to use a toothbrush with some dishwashing soap to clean off the sides before I hit it with the 400 grit wet dry sandpaper. I'm going to blend in the nicked paint as well as I can and remove as much of that heat stamp lettering as I can, while I'm careful to also keep the shape of the graphics on the side. The stripes between the silver and the red, I'm actually going to use that again, or at least reuse the placement of those stripes again. Back in the 1970s, Lionel offered a version of this engine with a blue face, and I liked that a lot. But I still can't find one of these in a price range that's good for me. I briefly thought about making my red Alco here into a blue-nosed Alco, but as you saw from the thumbnail, it didn't end up with a blue face. The yellow stripe will be my guide for the placement of the silver and the black paint. I used a brush and some touch-up yellow paint to redo the stripe before masking it off with some Tamiya modeler's tape. Hopefully, that tape will be the clear line between the silver and the black. When I pull the tape off, you should see a nice stripe of yellow and then the black around it. It's hard to tell in the video because the tape is a similar yellow to the paint beneath it, but it's there. And now I begin painting the black. The black will surround both sides of the yellow stripe, and then once this dries and cures, I can mask off the black and then head towards the silver. Now for the moment of truth, where the masking tape comes off and I find out how well it held up to the spray paint. I expect that some of the spray may have seeped underneath the tape, because there are a lot of irregular surfaces for the tape to conform to, and I think those areas are probably where it's seeped behind it. I don't mind doing a little bit of touch-up, as long as some of the long, straight, flat areas turned out okay, and so far, so good. The tape ended up doing a pretty good job, but it's not perfect, and I don't expect perfection, and a little bit of touch-up paint here and there isn't going to hurt the appearance of this model in the long run. And when it's all done, I will apply a clear coat anyway, and that should help to even things out. I don't think you'll notice any brush strokes, or at least they won't be too noticeable. I think it'll be fine. The last color to go on will be the silver, and I will use the same width of masking tape to mask a black stripe right above the yellow. I should also mention that I put a thin coat of clear over the silver before removing the masking tape. I want a glossy finish when I apply the decals, or else you would see the shape of the clear part of the decal showing through. But it's less noticeable if you have a glossy surface beneath the decal. I spent some time looking on eBay for replacement decals for a Lionel Santa Fe Alco, but I couldn't find any. What choice do I have except to make my own? I have an image of a Santa Fe Alco. I put that into Pages, which is a word processing program on my MacBook. Found some lettering that is similar to what was on the Locomotive, and I sized it to fit directly on top of the heat-stamped lettering that Lionel used. This way, my decal should cover up the recessed parts left over from the heat stamping process. Now that my lettering is matched up to the original, I can print them onto clear inkjet decal paper, give them a coat of glossy clear, and then after that sits overnight, they are ready to be cut out and applied to the freshly painted model. The decals are especially fragile at this point. The ink from the inkjet printer is probably not as thick as a commercially printed decal coloring would be, and a crack can very easily develop if this decal is played with too much. Smokey and the Bandit was a pretty popular movie back in the 1970s, and the black and yellow of this locomotive made me think of the Trans Am that was black with gold stripes. Why not call this locomotive the Bandit? You can see the imprint left by the heat stamping process in this part of the video. My decal should match up pretty closely to the area left behind by the old lettering. With several of my other projects, you may have seen me use a decal setting solution, and that works well with commercially made decals. but it reacts poorly to these homemade inkjet decals. So I can't use it when I print my own decals, at least until I find a clear gloss that doesn't react with the setting solution. I decided to make my own graphic for the nose of this Alco. I could have found one on eBay, but since I have some white decal paper, I decided to try to make my own. I just used several basic shapes in Pages again, and there's a thick enough black outline with this decal that even though I have to print it onto white decal paper, I will be able to come back with a brush and some black paint to blend that black edge of the decal with the black paint behind it. I trim the decal as closely as I can to that black outline, but I still expect some of the white decal paper to show through. And that's when my brush and some black paint that's the same paint that I sprayed the nose with will come in handy. Once that's applied to these edges, I think they should be almost invisible. And again, the whole model is going to receive a glossy clear coat. I think that will even everything out and you won't notice any of these edges at all. That black touch-up paint should be just about invisible when this is finished. This came to me as a shell only, no base of any kind, not a dummy base or a motorized one, but I have the red-nosed Santa Fe Alco from before, whose base was restored at that time, and I will just borrow it for this new Santa Fe Bandit, and I think the glossy paint on this frame is the exact same paint that I used on the nose of the Bandit, and they match up perfectly. It's missing a few parts. It's missing the horn on the roof, the windshield glass, the side glass, the number boards, and a headlight lens. But it looks pretty good even without those parts. And I am going to call this and announce this project officially completed. I'm happy with it. I like glossy paint. I know it's not something that you see very often on model trains anymore, but it looks fresh and crisp and brand new to me. And I like it. Earlier this year, about 6 months ago in fact, I went to a train show that turned out to be a great source for projects. The selection was good and so were the prices. I miss these shows. I wish they had them during the summer. But around here, it's mostly a fall, winter, and spring sort of deal. I think the next one won't be until September. But as I was leaving this swap meet last February, I decided to spend $10 on this little Lionel Alco shell. It's in fairly decent shape, but the silver paint on the roof needs help. The red paint around the nose is mostly okay. The decal on the front is nearly 100% intact, which is good so far. But the front apron has been broken, and that will need to be repaired or replaced. A little dish soap and a very soft toothbrush help remove years of gunk and greasy fingerprints. A clean surface is key for any paint work, and wet sanding feathers in the areas of missing and damaged paint on the roof. I used fine modeler's tape from Tamiya for the edges, and then blue painter's tape to mask off the rest. I was really nervous about damaging the black and yellow stripes because I wasn't planning on having to touch them up. Some spots were a little thin, but I wanted to keep them original. The silver paint was mostly just a very fine dusting to the sides, and then several light coats to the roof. The silver spray paint is from Rust-Oleum, and it's a pretty close match to the Lionel color. It's not very shiny, but neither was the original, so I think this is one problem fixed. Now it's on to the broken plastic piece up front. I have a decent amount of sheet plastic laying around, and I'm going to just temporarily cement the shell to the styrene in order to trace the shape as closely as possible. I ran the knife along the lines a few times to make a cut deep enough so that I could eventually snap it away from the larger piece. With the rough shape of the repair section established, it's time to trim away the broken areas of the Alco shell.
I left the repair section a little larger because it's much easier to remove material than it is to add it back. There will be more trimming and sanding later on, but this way is much safer. A little bit of Tamiya's Modeler's Putty will fill in any trace of a gap as well as any sanding marks. Once the putty is dry, I'll wet sand with 220 grit paper and then it's ready for paint. I've had a few Lionel F3s and this is my second Lionel Alco decorated with the Santa Fe War Bonnet paint scheme. I've struggled to find a decent red that is a match for the Lionel color. Until now. A recent trip to Menards led me to a different shelf in the spray paint aisle where I found this. Rust-Oleum's Ford Red for farm and agricultural equipment, and it turned out to be a perfect match for the existing Lionel paint, both in color and in level of shininess. Or is it sheen? Shininess might not even be a word, but I can tell you this, it's a really close match. I'd like to keep as much of the original paint and graphics as possible. So on the smaller areas of missing paint or nicks, I'll just spray some of the Ford Red into a cup and use a brush. This was once a red and silver Alco also, but it was too far gone for minor touch-ups. I repainted the shell and the frame, and right now it's the only base I have that will work with this kind of Alco shell, so they'll have to share. I may end up repainting this frame because it's possible that it's actually too shiny. But with only a little bit of it showing beneath the shell, it'll work for now. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this has been Bob's Workshop. Take care.